Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, I have to start the show by plugging our Patreon. I know I say it every single week, but it is the lifeline of the show. It's what keeps us going. So if you can, please pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast. It starts from £3 a month. The price of less than a cup of coffee, and you get a ton of bonus material on there. You get the Q&A episode we do with our guests every single week. So it's just a bumper part of the episode. Sometimes they're 20 minutes, sometimes they go for another hour. It's who knows what's going to happen, but they're always a lot of fun. So if you like a show, you like a guest, go check that out. They're going to be on there at this point. There's hundreds of bonus episodes on there. You get any bonus episode we do in the form of story time or the Viking smut that myself, Claire, and Mags do, where we look at amateur Viking erotica. These are always a lot of fun, unless you get into the awkward moment where they're actually good smut and you just realize that you're reading porn with friends and it becomes a little bit awkward. But they're still entertaining all the same. And you get the entire back catalogue. So we have the latest 20 episodes up for free for all to get, and the entire back catalogue is now on our Patreon. So you get 260 episodes that you can't get anywhere else, with some amazing guests. So please do go and check that out. With that said, let's get into today's show. So our guest is, we were just talking before the show, a reoccurring guest from 2 years ago, and that was 184. So I had a quick kind of realization of how long I've been doing this podcast and how many episodes we've actually done. So my guest today is Dr. Timothy Liam Waters, who is a postdoctoral scholar at the Center of Folklore Studies at the Ohio State University. His research explores literary materialisms, generative AI, and folkloric afterlives of Old Norse literature. Dr. Liam Waters, welcome. Do you use your first name? I see it kind of on your academic titles, but obviously on your social media and in here, you're Liam. Which are we going with?
Yeah, so I go by Liam in my day-to-day life. I just always have. My full name is Timothy Liam Waters, and I don't know. Ask my parents why they insisted on my middle name over the first name. So it was always fun as a kid, like first day of school trying to explain, like, no, it's Liam, not Tim.
Wait, hang on a minute. So your first name is Timothy, right?
Yes.
Okay, but you prefer Liam, or
just always gone by it? My parents always called me Liam. My father is Timothy Williams, so I suspect that they wanted to avoid some sort of like junior thing. But
that's so interesting, because usually you would just put like the father name. Like my middle name is Richard because my dad's called Richard. I don't think I've ever seen it where it was it was your first name, but I feel like that was a compromise between your parents. Actually, your dad
it must have been.
Yeah, your dad wanted like you to be named after him, but the compromise was that they would use the middle name.
I think that's what it must have been. I mean, I haven't quite gotten a clear answer out of them, but yeah, I'll keep trying. I'll let them know you brought it up on the podcast. But we got to get to the bottom of this.
You find out. So we've got an interesting topic today: cursed swords and divine body parts was the kind of title that you gave me, which perked my interest a little bit, because cursed swords is cool, and who doesn't like divine body parts?
Yeah, and two things that don't necessarily like jump out as being related, but I promise in my research at least they are. So the sort of hook between those two ideas is this sort of theoretical approach I use in my literary scholarship, which is called new materialism. And new materialism, just very sort of like bare bones, quick elevator pitch definition, is reorienting our sort of approach as scholars towards non-human, inanimate material,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a example that I use quite often in classes and that I've used elsewhere in public talks. About sort of literary approaches that scholarship takes to to inanimate material, to things, to objects. And it's this meme that got like circulated a lot. I remember seeing it even when I was a kid on the early internet, where it's like a Venn diagram of, a teacher asks you to explain what the blue curtains in a scene are. And there's the answer the teacher wants you to give, and there's the actual answer, right? The teacher wants you to explain how the color blue is actually indicative of the main character's internal sadness and whatever else. And the actual answer is the curtains are just described as blue.
Mm-hmm.
And new materialism is sort of an interesting intersection that says, well, what happens if we start just talking about the blue curtains in any one scene as being blue? And what is the significance of them sort of being colored the way they are, what material they're made out of, independent of how it reflects on a character within literature? So that's the sort of approach I take to medieval literature and to Old Norse myth and legend specifically.
So is that a case of looking at things more literally? So you're looking at you're not going, I guess, too deep into what things could be. You're taking the words as they are, and it's pretty much as you see it. Did I understand that correct?
To a certain extent, I'd say what should be reinforced there is this idea, rather, that there is a material logic that informs our understanding of what a particular object is doing within literature. So, I mean, we can think about this sort of in our day-to-day lives, insofar as objects have sort of a material logic that informs our behavior around them. So let's say you're at a baseball game in the United States, or really wherever else, and you're wearing a hat, and you go into the stadium, and the announcer says, "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthem." You'll see everyone takes off their hat. Now that material logic, right? That act that we perform in removing the hat is sort of part and parcel of its material logic. The hat's got to be on. You've got to be wearing it. It has to be physically present for you to interact with it. So by virtue of it being in your space, by virtue of you wearing it, it's demanding a particular sort of action upon you. Whereas if you weren't wearing a hat, you wouldn't have to bother to like go through the motions of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's the acts rather than this symbology as to why you would do the act.
Yeah, well, they're sort of all interrelated,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not just saying we've taken off our hats to show as a sign of respect, right? As this symbol of respect. It's partially that. There's a social dynamic where we are indicating to our fellow attendees that we are being respectful, but there's also the sort of relationship that we're having with that object of the hat itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So by virtue of our decision to wear it, by virtue of having it on us, right, it's not necessarily communicating something about us as individuals, as people, right? My decision to wear a hat to the baseball game could be simply informed by the fact I want to, shield my eyes from the sun. But the sort of social act that's happening, the sort of demand of being respectful, necessitates that I have a relationship that forces me to interact with that object in a specific way.
I wonder if anybody wears a hat to baseball just so they can take it off. Somebody
I'd be
must.
curious to know. Well, I mean, like, then you can go down the realm of, you've seen all of this sort of like stuff on the internet about, performative male competitions and that kind of thing. To a certain extent, is wearing the hat to, an act of sort of performativity. In some cases, it can be, right? If it's got the emblem of your favorite team on it, you are performing, you are doing a type of performance, right? You're gesturing towards your alignment with a particular team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we then, I guess, apply that to cursed swords? But also,
Yeah.
you said before, quickly before that reminded me, inanimate objects. But when we talk about divine body parts, if we get into that later, at what point
Mhm.
does a body part stop being like, I don't know, like,
When does it stop being animate? Yeah,
yeah,
that's a great
and
question.
part, because it is part of the human body, but once it's kind of not on there anymore, uh,
Yeah.
it's not really animate.
No. No, well, so all of these things are interrelated. I mean, that question in and of itself kind of like drives to the heart of a lot of what my research discusses. So let's to sort of answer, I think, where the theoretical question of what do cursed swords have to do with agency of objects to affect us, and what the hell are divine body parts doing in that? Let's sort of take a step back for a second and talk about the context of all Norse mythology, right? So this is where you're on your, what is this, the 200, 300 somethingth episode of the podcast?
290 ish, I think. I'm not
All right.
late 280, 290. I'm not too sure exactly what.
Okay. So in that kind of like 300 range. So I'm sure you and the majority of your listeners are familiar with the origins of the Norse cosmos, right? Which start with this really enigmatic figure, Ymir, this giant that exists in primordial time.
Mm-hmm.
And Ymir is asleep. He's just kind of like chilling by himself. The proto gods come in. They decide they've got to get rid of Ymir. They kill him. They chop up his body parts, and they turn his body parts into the embodied universe that we inhabit. Right. So his skull becomes the sort of the heavens. His brains become the clouds. His teeth become rocks, etc., etc. And that myth, from a sort of new materialist perspective, is really, really interesting insofar as it gets to your larger question of when does a body part stop being
Mm-hmm.
a body part and when does it become something else? And the origins of the Norse myth seem to be directly tied to that question.
Okay.
Is there really a difference in the mind of a Norse, of a medieval Scandinavian, I should say, in terms of understanding the heavens as being something distinctly different to the skull of a giant and so on and so forth? Or rather, is what's sort of underlying this whole story a question of how the human and the natural world are actually way more interconnected. More scholarship, lots of scholars within Norse mythology, or not Norse mythology, within new materialism, like to use this term transcorporeal, which just means that all things in the universe are sort of bodies are inseparable and in constant exchange with their surroundings and their environment, right? So that the boundaries between what is human and what is environmental, what is cultural and natural, are a little bit more permeable,
Mm.
more porous
What
than we
would
would originally think.
what would be the difference between that and, say, animism, which is a thing that's, I guess, quite popular at the moment?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm quite qualified to comment on like animism as a sort of religious movement or spiritual understanding. What I can say within that capacity is that I think there's been a sort of greater movement, uh, both within sort of like spiritual discourse, within heathenry and neo-paganism, as well as within academic contexts, that are sort of trying to realign these questions to try to sort of make sense of, are these stark divisions between the human and the natural world actually as strong as we've previously contended?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the answer, at least for most materialist oriented scholars would be, no, that doesn't really seem to be the case. And I suspect this is probably the conversation that's happening in animist circles, as well as sort of this materialist discourse might there might be some overlap between those two things, but like I said, I'm not as familiar with the latter.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. When as soon as you said, I guess divine body parts, or I just instantly went to, I don't know, an arm that had been hacked off, and then as soon as
Yeah.
and then you mentioned, Ymir, I was, oh yeah, actually that makes a lot of sense, that you have, the skull and the rivers from his blood, and all the, his eyes thrown up into
Mhm.
the sky, all these bits that I wonder, with things like that, I always wonder whether how literally they would take it, or is it just an explanation for the unknown, I guess.
I'm inclined to think it's probably the latter. And the reason I say this is because I think it's reasonable to assume that medieval people looked at their world, right, the natural world that was around them, and made points of comparison between their own physical bodies and the world that they saw around them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's sort of a natural, a natural relationship that exists to the heavens are the highest thing that we can see. That must mean that they can correlate to the highest thing on our body, right? The top of our
Okay.
heads, right? There are things like, bones and teeth are strong, they're brittle, they're hard. That must correlate, that must correspond in some meaningful way to the stones and boulders and whatever else we're seeing. Blood has this liquid flowing dimension, so does water. So there are connections insofar as those things go. But this comparison between, or the likening of the body to other inanimate objects, I think can also get really, really complicated very quickly. So like the story of Kvasir, right, in the
Mm-hmm.
Mead of Poetry is another good example of this. So you've got this figure named Kvasir. He's made from the combination of divine spittle, right? The Aesir and the Vanir get together. They decide, we're going to make a peace agreement. We're going to spit into a big vat, and out of this spit, we're going to make a it's a little ambiguous what Kvasir is. Is he a god? Is he a man? Doesn't matter. He's some anthropomorphic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a living being, and he's the smartest guy ever, right? That's explicit within Snorri. And because he's so smart, some dwarves decide they're going to kill him. They exsanguinate him, right? They take his blood. They decide to brew it into mead. And all of a sudden, this mead has the potential to create something meaningful and communicative. So as readers, we're sort of left going, what the hell is going on here? Like, we've got spit and we've got blood and we've got mead going together. Like,
Mm-hmm.
make it make sense, right? And when we start taking a sort of thing-oriented, object-oriented approach to that material, some patterns start to emerge and the story starts making more sense.
Okay.
So, why spit and mead, right? Well, we know even in some traditional forms of brewing that spit is used as a catalyst for the fermentation process. So if you go to places like Japan, the brewing of very sort of traditional sake is done explicitly by, I think it's like a virgin priestess is supposed to spit into a bowl, and that spit is used as the catalyst to get the sake to ferment and start going through the fermentation process. So that makes sense, right? We've got a combination of mead and spit kind of going together. But the mead is also doing a communicative thing, right? So later when it becomes the mead of poetry, it's explicitly related to this concept of speech and communication. spit is a very sort of like physical manifestation of speech,
Mm-hmm.
right? As anyone who's like gone to see a performance on stage can probably attest. You see actors when they're enunciating, I mean, spittle is flying like crazy. So there's sort of an exchange of things going on. Likewise, you see the exchange of the meat of poetry, right? Like Odin drinks this stuff up, holds it in his mouth, and then spits it out so that other people, poets, right, can take that, drink it, and then spit back poetry at you. And that cycle just kind of continues on and on. So there's a materially informed logic, I think, at work within the myths, and I think like the meat of poetry is a really good example of that, as well as myth and a variety of other things.
That's really fascinating because I never, I don't know, I would never have thought of it in that way. I would look at it as I don't know, just a lay person, I guess, and just through kind of eyes of it says what it says, so I'm going to follow the story and not go
Mm-hmm.
too deep into it. But I wonder if it has links to. Obviously, they know blood because it seems very odd killing the smartest being, but then you
Yeah.
make this drink from it. So there must be, or in my opinion, there must be some correlation between, spit of the gods who are very powerful beings being made into a human god that is incredibly smart. That blood then being made into mead, which I would assume would lean towards mead being held in high regard and being an important, you know,
Mm-hmm.
drink, part of everyday life that I guess you see it with Valhalla that the Einherjar are meant to drink meat. So it would then lean
Yeah.
to that being an important substance, and then that in turn being used to make poetry would then lean that the poetic verse is held in really high regard, in which case scrolls
Yeah.
would be, and it's all kind of these equally very important things that's one makes the next, makes the next, makes the next.
Mm-hmm. So let me even blow your mind further in this regard, right? So like if we're talking about okay, like the liquid dimension of exchange between, poetry and liquid, right? One of the first questions we could ask is, okay, obviously there's a connection between spit and speech. All right, that kind of makes sense. But if there's a brewing process here, right, the question that we can ask when we take materialist viewpoints is, okay, well, so why mead though? Why not beer?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Why not? Why that drink specifically, right? And my contention would be we can explain that. We can explain the decision of mead because of a material logic. Mead is the fermentation of honey, right? And when we start thinking about the qualities of honey, some things begin to emerge for us, right? Honey is a natural preservative and an antiseptic, right? But I mean, across the ancient world, it was used to preserve things, right? So I think ancient Egyptian mummies, if I'm remembering correct, are buried sometimes with like raw honey near
Mm-hmm.
them as part of this idea of immortality, something that lasts forever,
It doesn't go
right? Honey
off, does
doesn't,
it? Yeah.
it doesn't go off, right? So what does that mean if your poetry is inflected with honey? It means it's immortal. It doesn't go bad, right? It is consistent. It is stable, right? Provided that you're able to continue exchanging it from person to person, the knowledge it records continues to exist. And there's some truth to that, right? We're talking about it even today. Now, granted, there's a sort of, there's an element of that speech gets put into writing, and that's a whole other preservative aspect. But for an oral culture, right, like pre-Christian Scandinavia was, to inflect a material logic upon your poetry that says not only does it have this liquid dimension that we can see, but it's permanent and it doesn't spoil, it doesn't go bad. I mean, that's a powerful image. That's a powerful message.
Yeah, and you can go you go so deep with these ideas because you could then take it one step further and I guess say, well, honey is regurgitated
Mm-hmm.
from bees. Now, do I think that they? I don't know. Do I think they knew that? Maybe. I don't
I
know.
don't think they knew that bees were regurgitating things, but I would be hard pressed to see that they didn't know that birds didn't. And birds are a big part of that story as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Odin turns into a bird in order to steal it and then spits out the mead originally
Mm-hmm.
in bird
But
form, right? So all of these things are sort of informing.
if they kept bees, maybe they could have figured it out. I don't know.
I, I wouldn't know the
I
specifics of
wouldn't.
how to
No.
be able to observe that without a
Yeah,
microscope. I
I
mean,
wonder if.
but it is a curious pattern,
Mm-hmm.
right? That honey and therefore meat, it really is this product of regurgitation.
And and then
Whether they knew that or not, they've stumbled into it.
and I guess another thing, we all know the effect of alcohol on people's speech.
Mm-hmm.
Not in like not in a slow way, but the people talk more. I talk more. I get more chatty. People get maybe more willing to perform poetry or theater, or the idea of having a shot before you go on stage comes from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy my little gin and tonic when I do the podcast because I feel like it loosens things. That is a thing that might be part of the story as well, of this um performative aspect, just having that Dutch courage.
Oh, for sure. And the Norse sources are very concerned with that, right? Like it's a great thing. Alcohol's awesome for like performing social roles to get rid of inhibitions. But especially in something like Halvamal, right, the sayings of the High One, there are strong pieces of advice that say, right, like, but don't drink too much because like there's a limit. There's this
Mm-hmm.
nice middle zone you want to be
We
in
all know that.
where you're right.
We've all experienced that.
Oh, for sure. So what I think is like really interesting in that capacity is there's a medieval Icelandic saga called Egil Saga, where the protagonist of the story, Egil Skallagrimsson, he and his men, they're out. I think they're in Norway or Sweden. I forget exactly where, but mainland Scandinavia, and they stop for the night at a farmer's homestead. And they go in and the farmer says, right, I can feed you. I don't have much. It's going to be kind of like cheap food, but I've got no booze for you. I'm sorry. Rules of hospitality say I should give you something. I don't have anything. My apologies. Eitel and his men kind of go, all right, well, we can understand. We're not happy about it, but hey, if you don't have beer, you don't have beer. Um, Later in the night, the farmer's daughter gets kind of, like big-eyed at Ale, kind of likes him, and whispers, kind of like spills the beans and says, actually, my dad totally does have a ton of booze over in that like cellar over
Oh,
there. He just didn't want to give it to any of you. So Ale,
that's naughty.
oh no, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
totally, like completely has insulted Eötl and his men. So Eötl orders that the ale be passed around, tells his men that they have to drink as much as they can, and if they can't fill their horns, they have to give their horns to him so he can finish them off. And by the end of this evening, Eötl is so full of beer and so drunk, he walks over to the farmer who had insulted him, pins him up against the wall, and pukes in his face. And like it's this really gross, like
Mm-hmm.
very graphic moment in the saga where we're told that like vomit goes up his nostrils and is in his
Oh
mouth and
no.
all of this terrible stuff. And the farmer is left there dripping in puke, and Eighth decides to recite a verse where he commemorates having done this.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think, like, despite the fact that it's just objectively a really gross scene and it's memorable for that,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really, really interesting recontextualization of this concept of regurgitation and poetry and how those two things are interwoven. Because not only has like literally and physically regurgitated into the mouth of this farmer who has insulted him, but he's commemorated it. He's made it last. He's made the moment of it immortal because he commemorates his insult in a verse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this actual, I think, really interesting, symbolically latent thing that happens, and not just there for shock value. And it's directly related to this meat of poetry stuff, right? This meat of poetry myth.
Mm-hmm. How do you stop yourself not reading into things too much? Because let's, for example, the last story of Kvasir, I get excited and I'm like, ooh, the bees. Bee spit makes honey. How do you kind of pull back, or do you sometimes maybe go down rabbit holes and then have to then come back and say, okay, maybe that's not plausible. I have to second guess, because it is not just related to this topic. I always wonder in terms of, I don't know, I guess you apply this to any topic, not just in Nordic mythology, but any topic or anything. When you have a group of people whose specific job it is to isolate and analyze a specific topic, an area that you have not that you have to show your value, but you have to really kind of get in there and find and look for things and kind of play around with it. And so, but that can then, I guess, lead to maybe finding things that aren't really there, or trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. But even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking in my own mind, but then you have to kind of do that to then and discover those things, and then have the kind of willing to pull back and say, okay, we've explored that doesn't kind of fit, and then come back. Maybe I answered my own question.
It's totally related to this concept we were talking about earlier, though, right? It's in some ways the type of academic research being performed is a lot. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. It's a lot like drinking, right? Like there's overindulging certain ideas. Like you've got to find a right balance, right? It's all about play and following certain threads, right? At the end of the day, I think whether you're a scientist, whether you're a literary scholar, it doesn't really matter. We're all really interested in pattern recognition, right? Like where can we see things lining up, and how do we create meaning out of that? And because of that, right, like that can lead to really amazing discoveries and really insightful scholarship. But like you say, there's also a point of no return, right? Where that sort of play, that pattern recognition, it has to be tempered with actual evidence, right? So I can say something like, there is a material logic to mead and honey, and all of these things are involved. And because we see these patterns in the mythological material, they might be informing it in a meaningful way. But I would stop short of saying, but this also shows that medieval people understood that bees actually regurgitated honey, because one, it's not explicit within the text, and two, we don't have any medieval scholarship, or I think ancient scholarship for that matter, right? And when I say scholarship, I mean writings of philosophers and other people concerned with sort of natural phenomenon that talk about bees regurgitating pollen and whatever. I'm pretty sure that this is a more modern understanding of how bees interact. But you bringing up that pattern is itself a very interesting thing. I've had plenty of other scholars where I've talked about this particular topic before, who have given me the exact same feedback and said, isn't it interesting that bees do this? And have you considered that dimension? So, we're all part of a dialogue in which we're trying to assess how valuable is the rabbit hole, and how far, have we gone too far? Scholarship is really, I think, about this conversation where we're tempering each other and trying to keep each other on course, right? That's why it's not just one person, speaking to a room. It's a whole group of colleagues trying to come to a consensus about whether one argument works or not.
Perfect. Okay, cursed swords. before we,
Cursed
because we
swords.
we
Yeah.
that was meant to be the first topic, but we spent 40 minutes just talking about body parts. So
Yeah.
yeah, cursed swords. What are we looking at? Where are we going? Are we? Yeah.
So cursed swords and body parts, right? Two things don't necessarily seem very related. I'm going to make the
Unless
case
the
that
cursed
actually,
sword cut off the body part.
well, but this is the thing, right? So when we think of cursed swords, right? What does a sword do, right? It's this point of division, right? It's made for chopping and slashing and cutting things apart, right? So in that sense, it's related to body parts, right? You can dismember somebody using a sword, but I actually think there's something more interesting that's going on there. So just as something like the body parts of Ymir can be transcorporeal, right? In that the body constitutes the universe and the universe is made out of the body part. I think we can view weaponry in this similar context. So when I wrote an article about this a year ago or so, the example that I started off with was this very famous I guess you could say poem. It's the Rifleman's Creed that the U.S. Marine Corps uses. So anyone who's watched what is it? Not Apocalypse Now, but the other one, Full Metal Jacket.
Oh,
Right,
God.
we'll be familiar with this.
Very
Right,
different
this is my
films.
rifle. There are many like it,
Mm,
but this one is mine.
yeah.
Right. It's a really interesting poem in that it says not only is the rifle, like a brother and like a companion and like my fellow soldier, but it's also me. It is an extension of my body. It is an extension of who I am.
Mm,
And without my rifle, I'm nothing. And without me, my rifle is nothing. So we see the same kind of transcorporeal logic that's happening within that context, right? This likening of this thing allows me to extend my body. It allows me to extend my will out into the world. If I wasn't there, my rifle couldn't do anything. Likewise, if I didn't have my rifle, I couldn't, shoot somebody from a distance,
mm.
etc.
I guess it's protecting your life as well,
Yeah.
because it is when you wield these things, whether it's a rifle or a sword, a sword it's not a tool like maybe an axe you can use for chopping wood. A sword
Mm-hmm.
is a weapon. It is
Yeah.
made to kill and fight. That's its primary use. So when you're wielding one, the likelihood is somebody is swinging something sharp back at you, and the only thing really between your life and death is this object that you hold, that you then hopefully are going to not only save your life but kill the person who's maybe trying to kill and maim
Yeah.
you. And that's got to be a very, I guess it's tough to put yourself in that mindset without having to do it. And I remember listening to a podcast a long time ago, and the gentleman's name I've forgotten. I think it's Dakota or something. He was a Marine in
Mm-hmm.
Iraq, and I think they found themselves in like a an ambush situation that he had to go back into, and he was on the back of a Humvee with a kind of, it's not, I guess it's not a rifle, one of the ones that fix on the back of the vehicle, the really
Yeah.
big fucking guns.
Yeah. It's a massive gun that they
Yeah,
can
yeah, yeah.
swivel up.
And he was just saying how like in that moment he felt like he was machine. Like he wasn't him and the gun, there was no separation. Like everything was a blur, and this was part of him. And it was that
Mm-hmm.
kind of surrealism of that you're fighting for your life, but there's no separation there. He's one with it, and whatever he's doing is all kind of a singular act. And I guess unless you get put in those situations, it's probably hard to maybe understand that.
Yeah. Well, so to a certain yeah, so the martial archetype there definitely works, and I think really draws out that understanding. To a certain extent, though, you could apply this to any tool, right? Whether that's a hammer or a saw or anything, it doesn't matter if you're using it in a violent capacity, right? You are being extended. Your body is becoming extended. You're almost becoming one with the
Mm-hmm.
thing that you're using. Whether you're nailing a picture up on the wall, or if you're in a combat situation.
I
But
imagine that jeopardy just must add something to it,
well,
though.
it heightens something
Mm-hmm.
to it. And I think part of the reason that you get a lot of this imagery within the Norse material that we have, as well as something like the Rifleman's Creed, is that there's an element of divested responsibility, right? It's sort of like this classic thing that you hear in American politics a lot about the Second Amendment, right? Like, oh no, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And to a certain extent, I think there's some of that logic at play within this of, well, I didn't kill that guy. My sword killed that guy. The thing that you should be scared of isn't me. It should be my sword, right? There's a movement away from I, as the wielder of the sword, am a killer of men, to the sword is the killer of men. Those things sort of become permeable, and there's a plausible deniability between the sort of violent, monstrous action you see and the mediation between those two things that's embodied by the use of the weapon.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's certainly something to be said, and I think everybody listening to this could probably agree with it, that the closer the act of violence, the more heinous it feels and the more personal it feels. If you were to strangle somebody to death with your bare hands, that is a very raw, animalistic act. It's super violent. Most people couldn't do it. But then you remove yourself to, I don't know, a drone operative sat in an office somewhere in the United States, and you're almost playing a video game that a lot of people play, and you're looking at things through a screen or a headset, and you're not looking the people in the eye, you're not feeling them, there's not that tangible connection, and you're just pressing a button, and what happens, but you don't have to deal with the smells, the sight, all these things. Those are two very different things. Although the outcome is the same, the person dies. The actions feel very differently, and one of them probably sleeps much easier than the other.
Sure, but there's still immediate. I think the example you give of drones is a really good one to help us understand what's happening. Is there's a distance that's created in some ways. There's a divestment of responsibility, right? And we see this in a lot of the Norse material. In particular example, there's a cursed sword in a saga called the saga of what is it? Hervara Saga og Heidreks. And in that saga, there is a sword called Tyrfingr. And Tyrfingr, we are told, is explicitly cursed. It was made by dwarves for a very old king, and it was supposed to be the best of all swords, right? It would never fail in battle, always kills the person you're intending, I shouldn't say that. I should say it always kills effectively.
Mm-hmm.
But its curse, right, is that it has to kill every time it's drawn. So there might be instances in which it's drawn in which you don't necessarily, as a wielder, want to kill somebody, but the sword, by virtue of its nature and its curse, demands that that's the case, right? And this plays out in the saga, right? So the famous example of this is there is one of the subsequent inheritors of the sword. His mother gives him this cursed sword as a token of her favor, and he's quite chuffed about this. And he's out for a walk with his brother. I think he's the younger brother. The one he's with is the older brother. So he kind of wants to make a stink about, hey, look how much mom likes me, right? Look how important I am. And in bragging, he draws the sword to show his brother how cool it is, right? And a madness comes on him because of the curse. And because his brother is the only one nearby, and because the curse dictates that the sword must draw blood every time, he becomes a kinslayer. He kills his brother.
Wow.
And there's a question of who's really responsible in the killing. Is the sword responsible, or is the character responsible? And as with most things, it's a combination of both. And in my research, I kind of make the contention that it is both, because both are equally culpable and both are equally actors
But
in what's happened.
does this does he know the sword is cursed?
I'm not sure that, well, I don't know that it's explicit in the text that he is told by his mother that it is cursed. I suspect that would probably be good information for her to have given. I honestly can't remember, but she definitely does. She knows for sure that this thing is cursed. Because when she retrieves it, she's told by her undead zombie father, the whole other side of the story, that this thing is cursed, and explicitly that this sword will be the death of your family. Don't take the sword. It's going to go bad.
The mother's culpable then. 100%.
Yeah,
I mean, the son, if he doesn't know that sword is cursed, then he pulls it to show. I think he's an innocent act in that. If he doesn't know that it's cursed, then he's showing the sword of, he doesn't know that he's going to be struck mad and then have to kill his brother. The sword is a cursed item. I feel like you can't put blame any more on the sword as you can on the rifle. But the mother knows. She should have passed that information on. And
probably it does seem to be part of this character's nature, right? The brother who kills his own brother. Because in a slightly different, this is always the complication with medieval literature, is that oftentimes you get variants of a manuscript telling the same story, right? So in one version of the story, right, which is contained in two different textual receptions of it, the sword is the reason why. He takes the sword out. He's not thinking, about the consequences, kills his brother, right? In another, he's pissed at his brother already because he wants to be a favorite. He hasn't been invited to a feast or something. So in the dark, out of frustration, he throws a rock and it hits his brother in the back of the head and kills him. And it's an accident, but he clearly threw the stone in malice. And then he inherits the sword as a direct sort of consequence of killing his brother.
I like that one, because that shows why he would have a cursed sword.
It could be both, right? But there's an interplay in between. It shows his sort of nature as well as the capacity of the sword. But the sword can't act alone. It has to have somebody to wield it.
Him having, I guess, doing an evil act, for me, would then explain why he deserves the cursed sword. It's like a true story of that he gets this cursed sword because actually he's a bit of a dick and he killed his brother, whether by accident or not. He shouldn't have, you shouldn't throw swords. The other one seems like a little bit illogical, that his mother just gives him a sword that's cursed. Why would she do that? Surely you would tell him, unless he. I guess the other option would be that he knows the sword's cursed and he forgets and then he pulls it out, in which case he is certainly responsible in part for just forgetting.
Yeah, so let's talk about the second point that you raised, though. Like, why give your son a cursed sword? That seems like a pretty terrible gift to give your favorite son.
Or at least
right?
not tell. At least tell him.
Right. Well, so the problem here is that there's an interplay between, it's cursed, but it's also it's a really good tool, right? Like, it has this fault to it, but it's also an incredibly prized thing. This family desperately wants the sword because it always kills effectively, right? It's a sort of a symbol of power. A good counterpoint example to this might be something like the One Ring, right? In the Lord of the Rings, right? Everyone wants it. There's this danger to it, right? And people know it's dangerous, but they still want to possess it because look at the power it can give you. There's kind of a similar thing happening with Tyrfingr, in that not only is it this really powerful sword par excellence, but it's also at the point at which this brother is killing his other brother, it's a family heirloom that shows legitimacy, right? that it's sort of the treasured family item that is passed down from, you know, your great 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 grandfather and like tenderly cared for. So it legitimizes you. It legitimizes the family line
Mhm.
in some ways. So it's a desirable thing. It just has this
I,
fault. We could just as easily pivot and talk about something like the sword Gramnir in Volsunga Saga, which is really valued and wanted and is passed along familial lines.
the the curse isn't that bad of a curse if you know about the curse,
Yeah.
because it's, you know, if you know that it has to kill, then you just, well, I'll only draw it when I have to. But not
Mhm.
knowing that is, I think, is the issue. It's the lack of information being passed on. It it reminds me of, and my ignorance is going to show here a little bit, and I apologize, of
No, no, go for
the
it.
no I'm sure is it like a ceremonial sword in Sikh religion that when it's drawn you have to shed blood. I'm sure I used to work with a Sikh gentleman, and I'm sure there is
Mhm.
a sword, or I'm pretty sure it's a sword, not a knife. That if it's drawn, the idea culturally and religiously is that it has to shed blood. So you would, even if it's just cutting your own hand. So like
Mhm.
culturally, it would be, if you draw it, you would have to even cut your own hand just to shed some blood, and then you can put it away. And it's just this religious idea, and I,
Mhm.
I'm sure somebody will correct me maybe if I'm wrong, but that's the I know that that's like the bones of it. Maybe I'm off on here or there a little bit, but so that's what it reminds me of, this idea that you have to, it has to draw blood, it has to be used.
Yeah. I can't comment on the Sikh example specifically, but if it does exist, you know, I think it's a really powerful symbol and message. I mean, it's indicative of other sort of traditions and sayings, right? Like don't draw a weapon, you know, without intent, right? You see this across media in a variety of places, but the sort of idea being reinforced here is this is an instrument that performs violence. So to draw it requires some sort of violent consequence. So it's actually like quite a good teaching method in some ways to say like, here is the consequence of drawing this. Don't draw something in anger. Don't draw, like, you better think through what's going to happen because the consequence of using a tool of violence is violence.
I was just having a quick look. Apparently it's a myth. So
Okay.
it's related to the Kirpan. um
Mhm.
and there's a nice little forum here that kind of explains it. It says that no, they don't have to put blood on it, but it's a saying that's used to, I guess, to scare others so they don't poke and kind of aggravate. So it's probably one of those things that's just survived in kind of myth.
Yeah, in popular media, but I mean that even the intersection between the two things we're talking about here are interesting. That there's sort of a similarity in narrative here that kind of reinforces that message.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so curse swords. What other ones do we have? How many are
How
there?
many?
Yeah, are there a lot of
Yeah,
examples of this?
yeah. So I mean, there are quite a few. I mean, so I would say there are lots of named swords that do semi-magical things, right? But you know, so Tirfinger is probably the example that
Okay.
most people point to. There's another cursed sword that's also named and quite prominent, but in a sort of less known legendary saga. And that's the saga of Dietrich von Bern. So the Dietrich saga in Old Norse. Um, and in that saga, it's incredibly, incredibly long. And it's a very sort of like almost high romance level, you know, like Old Norse saga. There's actually three swords within that, but the really important one that always gets talked about, and that does seem to be cursed in some capacity, is called Mimmungur. Um, and this sword is incidentally known across the Old Norse and Germanic world, because it is allegedly forged by the legendary smith. In Old Norse, he's called Volundur. In
Oh,
Old English, he's called Wayland,
mm-hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
he's the guy who forges it. Um, and in Thithric Saga, some interesting thing happens. So Volundur Wayland, he's imprisoned by an evil king who wants him to forge basically anything and everything for him whenever he wants. Hamstrings him as a way of like making sure that Wayland can't leave. And Wayland decides he's going to forge. I mean, in Thithric Saga, he forges like three fake swords and then the actual real sword. It's kind of a convoluted section. But in forging Mimungr, this last sword, the best sword he makes, we're told that he does something kind of funky, which is he takes a bunch of like the filings you would take of metal, and he puts all of that into a bunch of like grain and meal, and he feeds that to a bunch of birds, and then the birds excrete that waste. He then takes the waste with all those metal filings and then uses that to forge this amazing sword. And there have been
How
all of these questions. Yeah,
how
I know.
unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Is there
He's not, the saga's not the only one to record this as a process of making swords, though.
that's what I was wondering. Is there any I would love to talk to a swordsmith or blacksmith. Like, is there any can there be any benefit to that? Do we know of any
Yeah.
reason why that would even be a thing?
Interestingly enough, you are not the first person to ask this. And in fact, in the I want to say the 1930s, I would have to go look, there were two German scientists, researchers, historians who did just this. And we're like, cool, we're going to go figure out whether or not bird dung is an effective ingredient to making a really good sword. The answer is yes and no.
Okay.
So, like the process that's described in the saga, birds don't really eat the metal. They just kind of pick around the grain. Like they don't really do
Yeah,
that.
I was going to say,
Right?
please don't go feed birds
No,
metal filings as well. I
disclaimer.
imagine it's not very good for them.
No, not at all. So that aspect of it doesn't seem to be rooted in any type of reality. But what these German researchers did find, actually, I think it might have been the 1950s, come to think, what these German researchers found is that if you add the excrement to the actual forging process, there are demonstrable benefits because the dung is it's really high. I think it bears a lot of like high nitrates to it, and that like positively influences the steel during the forging process. Now, some of those results have been problematized. There was a researcher named, I want to say Coghlan or Colin, I can't remember his last name. Coghlan, I want to say, who did a similar study and kind of heaved and hawed on like how effective this would be. But there does seem to be at least some preliminary evidence that actually that might not be a bad thing. Other historical researchers have made the argument that this connection between birds and dung actually comes from a misunderstanding of East Asian forging practices, where the sort of metal that fell out of the forge, if you smelted it the right way, kind of looked like a big like bird egg, and that by the time that tradition and understanding got to Europe, they've just misunderstood what's happening. They just knew, oh, there's a bird connection.
Okay.
But what the actual like reality is, we're still kind of guessing. But it's explicit within this text.
There are these. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but there are. I've certainly heard of them when it comes to, whether it's working in a trade like blacksmithing or, I don't know, plumbing or any of these like trade things, these little kind of old wives' tales that for no reason at all, people do these little things just because the person who
Mhm.
taught them did it. It doesn't really have any benefit, but it's almost superstition at this point that you know their their teacher did it and the teacher before them did it, and it probably for whatever reason became part of the culture and just gets passed down, and
Yeah.
it sticks because it's like, well, if that's how they did it, I'm going to do it the same way. I don't want to risk taking out of it, even though I know it doesn't make any difference. I'm just not going to fuck with the
Yeah.
recipe.
Well, what you're talking about fundamentally, well, it's the nature of tradition, but it's also the nature of folklore, right? We
Mm,
do things all the time
yeah.
that we don't really understand,
Mm-hmm.
but we do it because other people have done it and we've been told that's the case, whether the rationale is superstitious or not.
Yeah.
So, like a great example of this, I always used in my classes when I was teaching at UC Berkeley, where I did my PhD, is in front of the big library on Berkeley's campus. There is a big seal of the university that's on the ground in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the wisdom to this thinking is you don't step on the seal because then you'll have bad luck and you'll fail all of your exams, right? So every semester I would ask my class, usually of about 20 students, how many of you know the story? Almost all of them knew the tradition. I would say, how many of you believe that it is literally true? Maybe 1 out of 20, if even, right? Then the inevitable question, how many of you step on the seal?
None of them.
No
Yeah.
hands, right? So, like, this is the element of folklore and superstitious belief.
Mm-hmm.
But it underlines a wider principle. You know, that's that folklore tradition. That's rooted in taboo. You don't step on the seal because it's respectful. You're trying to be respectful of your you're trying to be respectful of the university,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that taboo, that prohibition works its way and becomes narrativized in some sort of, if you step on it, you'll have bad luck and you'll fail your
Mm-hmm.
exams.
It's
Now,
that
whether like
just in case, isn't it?
yes,
That's all. I think football. I think there's like a similar thing with football clubs that at the side of the pitch they'll have the team emblem on the ground. You know,
mm-hmm,
like where you walk out by the two dugouts where the team managers sit. I think typically they'll have like the logo there, and it's a similar superstition that you don't walk on it because it's bad luck.
yeah,
Even though it's not going to do
yeah,
anything,
but
but
maybe.
maybe what if it
Yeah.
does?
Yeah, I mean, there are a million different examples of this. Like, I grew up in Chicago. We have this whole thing about like the curse of the Billy Goat. Like, the Cubs are a baseball team that didn't win the World Series for like 108 years or something. The rationale was that a farmer who wanted to bring his goat into Wrigley Field was denied and then cursed the team to never win another World Series until his goat was allowed to be, to enter in. So, I mean, you're talking for like almost 100 years of people trying to bring goats into Wrigley
I
Field to
bet
like try to end the curse.
it's why
Right? So we do this all the
it sounds so crazy, but all of us, if we think deep enough about it, we probably all do one of these or would be susceptible to doing one of these because it's that human fallacy of just that what if
time.
maybe it's easier to just not step on the seal than
Yep. Mm-hmm.
stepping on it. It
Oh, for
just
sure.
walk around. It's just a couple of extra steps. It doesn't.
Right. I mean, there's practical wisdom to all these things as well. I think it's Pat Rothfuss gave a really good example of this in one of his books where he said, if you go to a tiny town and somebody walks up to you in the bar, you've never been to the town, and they say, hey, welcome to town. So glad you're here. Real quick word of advice. Don't go up on the mountain. There's a dragon up there. You think the guy was nuts. If 5 people came up to you and said it, you'd maybe be a little suspicious. But if everybody in town told you, hey, don't go up the mountain at night, there's a dragon up there, whether or not you believed there was literally a dragon, you'd have to be pretty dumb to go up on top of the mountain. There's clearly something happening up there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating because if enough people agree on something and tell somebody there's a dragon,
Mhm.
you will just avoid it, even though it's illogical. Humans just, I guess, are like that. And right,
Yeah.
it's probably part of our design to avoid possibly dangerous, situations. You just, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't.
Right. Well, I mean, so to bring it full circle to our conversation about cursed swords, right? This is part and parcel of that. That a narrative that sort of says, "Hey, this thing could be cursed." It might demand that you do something you don't want to do with it. Might make you think twice,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or might make you understand the role of those objects in your day to day life a little bit differently. I mean, there's plenty of sort of superstitious thinking that exists within the Eddic literature. In Snorri, we get told that there's a prohibition against letting dead men's toenails grow. You got to clip them because otherwise they're going to get used to I don't know, help make this boat at the end of the universe that Loki is going to steer, right? So there are all of these sort of ritual practices that got tied up in this sort of superstitious or even religious thinking.
That's fascinating because I wonder if that comes from, when people die. Obviously, I don't think the toenails do continue to
No, it's that the
grow,
beds
but it's
recede
that
because you're
everything
dehydrated.
else recedes back.
But it would look that
So it
way. Yeah.
looks. So then, you know, they would maybe think, oh, toenails are still growing. We better cut them. They're no good.
Well, so let's take that back to the example of bodies I was using at the beginning of our session. That's a great example of the reason why that prohibition exists is because the toenails make you go, whoa, is this thing actually dead or is it alive? Where's the boundary between where the corpse is and where I am? There's a split between that thing is no longer human versus I am still human. I am alive, that thing isn't. But a ritual like the toenails thing begins to complicate that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess especially in a world that isn't full of as much science. We have a lot of explanations for things that the people in the Viking Age didn't have. So we have to try and put ourselves into a different
It's a different
mindset.
mode of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like today, in modern society, we have a stark division between superstition, religious thinking, traditional thinking, what have you, and science as an empirical thing that is external to those, right? For a medieval Scandinavian, there's no distinction there,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is an understanding that the world operates based on these known principles. That of course the skull of the giant is up there, right? Of course there are bad things that live out in the woods that you don't want to mess with. Yeah, I mean, like it is a worldview. It is a way of doing pattern recognition that is meaningful and informative. It just isn't empirical in the way that we think about it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to put myself in the mindset of somebody in the Viking Age. Just that, because it's kind of unrelated, but it's kind of related. I always think that people in 2025, we think we know everything. We think that science has all the answers. That as humans, we're pretty, the shit. We figured it all out. We understand kind of the universe and all these complex things. But I also feel that people probably, 50 years ago at the cutting edge of science probably thought they had it all figured out as well until somebody comes along and says, actually, that's not quite right. So that could very possibly happen to us. That
It will inevitably.
there will be advancements to where in 100 years time they were cavemen in 2025. Why on earth did they do XYZ? And I think
But
that
this is the distinction, right? That science is a moving target, right?
mm-hmm.
It is predicated on this idea that you form a hypothesis, it seems to work. Somebody shows that actually we have to tweak that. We need to make it a little bit, more refined. I mean, the goal of science is to move towards sort of like a it's an ever diminishing point in the horizon, but it's a good thing for us to do. And the same thing can be said about the scholarship that, my colleagues and I are doing. You asked earlier, how do you prevent yourself from falling down these rabbit holes? And it's a very similar process of we're trying to understand the mentality of a person in the Viking Age, right? But it's a moving target. And so what we're trying to move towards, and we'll never get there because we can't, short of a time machine, we'll never be able to interview someone from the Viking Age. So what we're doing is constantly refining our idea of how they viewed the world, right? And to do that, we have to reach a consensus, right? So I throw out an idea, my colleague throws out an idea, we go to a conference, the whole field comments on this, and we kind of sort of collectively come to a decision of, we think that guy's on to something. We're going to keep moving the ball forward. So they're very, interrelated concepts.
But I think then how does this trickle down to the everyday person, the average Joe? Because I guess that's where I started out, and I still see it when I frequent the Facebook groups, and it's the same. It won't just be the same for Nordic mythology and the Viking Age, like just for science in general. The things we learnt at school on a very kind of basic level of this, and this. I'm sure once you go into a deeper understanding and then maybe a university level education, those things actually become really blurred. And it's like, yeah, it is that, but maybe actually not. And it's the same with the Viking Age. People have these kind of nuggets that they learn because it can be put in a box, and it's easy to digest because at the end of the day, for everybody, the Viking Age isn't their entire life. For obviously for me and for you, that it is, but
a little different.
Yeah, but for most people, it isn't kind of everything. So they learn these bits of information, these bite-sized bits. They don't have the time to think deeper or do deeper research.
No.
So it's kind of, you get these bits that was kind of true, but not really when you go further in, maybe ish. And how do we reconcile
those two things?
How do you, because you want people to have somewhat accurate information, but also,
well, it's part and parcel of what you're doing with this podcast. And this isn't just me sort of flattering for the sake of flattering, but there are sort of two elements in what you talk about that are really, really, extremely important. And this is what a discussion that those of us in academic circles are constantly talking about is, if we want people to be informed, right? If we want the public, right, this nebulous public that exists to be informed, we have to have two things, and they're interrelated, but they're important. One is there has to be public trust in our officials, right? So the public has to generally say, we trust the process of what's happening at the universities. We believe that those experts are doing work that is informed, and we can trust their findings. The second is public facing scholarship. So exactly what you're doing here with this platform with the podcast, which is giving a voice to the scholarship that's being done in those fields, right? Reaching out and saying, hey, you guys are over in your ivory tower, whatever, talk to us. What's going on? What did you find? I want to be able to go and tell the wider world in an accessible way where I don't have to have a subscription to a journal that's going to cost me, $1,000 every year. Yeah. So those two things are really, really important. And the more public facing scholarship you have, the more that you have this ability of people to talk to experts and vice versa, the more trust that the public generally has in those institutions. So it's a great question.
I think there's still another step in there, because even for us, we try to be as, what's the word? I guess, credible, authentic to scholarship, to who we are as a podcast. But that's not always what gets attention on social media in 2025. But I'm also, I guess, a believer that you have to fight fire with fire. So if we want to as much as I don't want to play the clickbait game, I'm sure the podcast
Mhm.
could be a little bit more outreaching if we did. And so and that's a battle I have with myself quite often of, we want to keep the credibility, but we also want to do the purpose of what the podcast is here to do, which is to reach as many people and share as much information as possible. But people so quickly go to the quick 30-second videos, or the charismatic person, or the person who's just saying what they want to hear, because it's really difficult to have what you've learned challenged. People will
Mhm.
always just lean towards the people who don't, they don't have the education, they're not bothered about the truth, they just care about reaffirming kind of what's there because they know it's going to get likes or
Mhm.
clicks. And that's a difficult thing, and I always wonder how we kind of bridge that gap between everything. And even us, we haven't found the answer. I don't know if there is an answer, because
I certainly don't have it if it exists, but I think what you guys are doing in this sense, what this platform is really valuable for, is it creates an opportunity for that dialogue,
mhm,
and at the absolute very least, that's a pretty damn good first step.
yeah. And I guess I get to benefit from it, and then I get to go into all the Facebook groups and tell everyone, go and check this out. Actually, and
Yeah.
I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess, because the amount of
Mhm.
times that I don't seem to learn. The amount of times that I've given people an episode, or a one of the ones that I constantly do is Keir Stetkavich's dissertation on Glima and medieval martial arts, and
Yes, I
and
saw the advertising and the fallout for
and
this.
I give
Mhm.
that dissertation to more people, because I'm like, actually, Glima, just go and look at this. It's a sport. There's no evidence to suggest it's a martial art. But the amount of people that then just go, actually, that's not what I want to believe, or the
Mhm.
ideal, because it's cool to think that Vikings have a
Yeah.
martial art. That's cool. Yeah, of course, that's really cool. But
Mhm.
they didn't, and it takes some, you know, self uh, reflection to then kind of go, oh, maybe actually my first thought was wrong. I'm going to look at this. And so the amount of people that go, actually, no, I don't know who that guy is. I'm not going to read it. I was like, and I actually had it the other day with Christianization of the Viking Age, and I sent somebody to Professor Anders Windroth's book,
Mhm.
and I was like, you know, this is the book. This is the book. This is one of the guys when it comes to the Christianization of Scandinavia. Like,
Yep.
not many people know, or if anybody knows more than this guy about the Christianization of Scandinavia. Read the book. This is his thoughts. But he was like, no, no, they were forced. Olaf
Yep.
Tryggvason, always use that as an example and go, it was all kind of bloodshed. And I was like, banging your head against a brick wall of just, what the fuck do I do? Why am I still doing this?
No, I mean, the fact of the matter is, at least in my opinion, I think the majority of the interaction that you're going to have, at least, not necessarily publicly, right? But the loudest voices in the room tend to be those who are obstinate to those ideas. But I think there is a real benefit to creating the resource alone, because for all of that sort of like banging your head against the wall, every once in a while there's enough of a crack that somebody gets
Yeah,
through,
yeah,
right? And so I mean, it's the small wins,
it
right?
is. It is.
This is what it's like to be an educator, man. Like,
I've,
this is what it's like talking to a group of students who, like, there's a little bit of a difference because you're in a classroom and a good majority of them are there to hear what you have to say and will think about it. But every once in a while, you're butting heads with a
Mhm.
student, and there have certainly been moments, and this is the thing that I love about being a teacher, is there are moments where if a student has brought up a good, point against something that I'm saying, I'm fully willing to be convinced. I've had those moments of going, you know what? I wasn't as informed about that as I thought. That forces me to
Mhm.
change my view of that. So the dialogue is really the thing that's
Yeah,
the critical dynamic.
absolutely. I agree. All right, Liam, let's wrap this up and we
Yes.
will do a quick little Q&A or a little bonus part. Because there is one question I saw Jennifer ask about a certain horse appendage that has
Yes.
popped up on the podcast a few times. I think Simon Nigard told us about it. We
Mm,
had Claire Muller talk about it. And I want to ask about whether
yes.
that I guess not strictly a human body part, but it is a horse body
Yes. You're talking about
part.
Pulsafalter. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to ask about that and a few other things on Cursor. So if you want to hear about horse dicks, I guess come over to Patreon. It starts from £3 a month. Come and check out the bonus episodes. They get a little bit more lighthearted. And if you can't, a 5-star rating, positive review, wherever you get your podcast, maybe someone else will find it. Or just a like, share, go onto YouTube, hit the subscribe button, the bell button, and then you can watch the episodes. And yeah, we really appreciate all those things. Liam, where can people, I guess, find you or your your articles that you put out?
Yes. So I am on, I think at least I'm still on Twitter, Blue Sky. You can find me at Liam, Liam, H2OS. So Liam Waters. Fun little joke there.
I didn't even put that together. That's
Oh, yeah.
I love
It's
that.
all
That's
good.
great.
Oh, it's such a bad pun, but I get away with that. Otherwise, you can find me on academia.edu, where a good chunk of my scholarship is
Nice.
published, including this recent article about cursed swords.
Wonderful. And then for me, Daniel_Farrand1, Horns Voting for the Business, and then Nordic Mythology Podcast across the board. Like I say, go and check out our YouTube channel. Perfect.